this is a really imperial-type sort of exploitation deal. And most importantly, it would mean that the Ukrainians are paying the Americans at the very time when they need the money most, whether it's to prosecute the war effort or, if the war ends, to rebuild their country. So, I mean, actually, it really does represent an attempt to leverage Ukraine's weak position to exploit it quite horrifically.
President Putin is nearing the end of his life, and the invasion of Ukraine will come to an end upon his demise, according to President Zelensky, warning that Moscow is readying its forces for an imminent offensive. Let's speak to Mark Galeotti, the historian and Russia expert. Mark, good morning.
Hello there.
I think it's also worth reflecting on reporting from the Times today that Donald Trump is really coming down hard when it comes to the deal that he wants to try to secure. We refer to it as the minerals deal, but it sounds as though he's actually pushing for a lot more control, a lot more influence when it comes to Ukraine over things like oil and gas and other infrastructure. Talk to us about President Trump's approach to Ukraine as we now understand it with this deal.
Yeah, it's really striking because we had this earlier minerals deal, which very much Zelensky pushed back, saying essentially he wasn't going to mortgage Ukraine's sort of mineral wealth to the Americans. And the Americans pulled back at that point. And I think a lot of people assume that they decided that they had overreached. Instead, what we now see is that they come back doubling down. And we have this idea that essentially all these various minerals and assets within Ukraine would be brought under the control of a structure which the Americans would largely control. And that essentially, taken off the top, the first $100 billion worth, plus interest, that is actually sort of produced as a result of that, would go to the Americans. And then after that, it would be split between the Americans and the Ukrainians. I mean, this is a really imperial-type sort of exploitation deal. And most importantly, it would mean that the Ukrainians are paying the Americans at the very time when they need the money most, whether it's to prosecute the war effort or, if the war ends, to rebuild their country. So, I mean, actually, it really does represent an attempt to leverage Ukraine's weak position to exploit it quite horrifically.
The argument from the Americans, from President Trump, is that this deal will make Ukraine prosperous. Is there any validity to that?
I mean, there is a very, very marginal validity in the sense the idea is, well, if you have American companies exploiting all these resources, there will be American workers on the ground and American interests, and surely Putin wouldn't dare attacking if it runs the risk of that. But we've got to remember, there are lots of Americans already in Ukraine, journalists, aid workers, business people, whatever. And that's in no way representing some kind of a limit to Putin's ambitions. And in any case, this is in some ways a fantasy deal in that it presupposes exploiting a lot of minerals, which it can take a hell of a lot of upfront investment to make valuable. And it's unlikely that any company is going to go into Ukraine in the middle of a war. So really, this is anyway going to affect after some kind of a deal has been struck.
Parts of the deal as well. For example, the US would appoint 3 of the 5 board members of this supervisory board that would oversee this joint investment fund. So 3 of 5 would be appointed by the United States, therefore obviously having a majority and therefore exerting a lot of influence over the board as well. The other thing, the draft says the contributions of the US following the full-scale invasion by Russia would be deemed as contributions to the partnership already. So it's almost as if they're seeing their contributions to defending Ukraine as paying it forward, if I can put it colloquially in that way. Is this likely to happen? I suppose, Mark, is the crucial question. The other sort of note to observe is that the British and the French have obviously been trying to secure a just peace for Ukraine in the midst of all of this, and I think there is something of a rift between Washington and Europe when it comes to this sort of deal particularly. So is it likely to happen?
I can't see how it will happen because I don't think Zelensky is able to do that. The interesting thing is, after all, that his approval ratings had been sliding because people understandably were very tired of the whole war. ever since we had his mugging in the White House, and since then this sort of worsening of relations, his approval ratings have been increasing. So the irony is, because remember, the Americans are also amongst the ones pressing him to hold elections, even though that's actually against the Constitution, but that's a whole other issue. So that the irony is, at the very time the Americans are saying you should have an election, you should put yourself up once again for the judgment of the Ukrainian people, they are putting him in a position where if he agreed to this, it would be seen widely in Ukraine as a shameful capitulation. You're fighting a war of terror, that launched for territorial imperialism by Putin, and you're now being faced by what was meant to be your most powerful individual ally, by what is in effect economic colonialism. So, I mean, I just don't see how Zelensky could agree to this. Now, it may well be this is just meant to be a sort of a hardball negotiation strategy, and something a little bit less ridiculous will be arranged and agreed. But at the moment, to be honest, the Americans look more like they're trying to impose terms on Ukraine rather than start any kind of real discussion.
Yeah. What then, Mark, of this suggestion that President Putin is nearing the end of his life, and that will lead to the end of the invasion of Ukraine once Putin's demise is written into history?
Oh dear, oh dear. I remember I was in Moscow at the end of 2013 when I first had someone come up to me and very confidently say that they had the inside gen and that Putin had, I think at that point it was thyroid cancer. Anyway, and was going to be dead within 6 months. And essentially since then, we have had this constant stream of claims that he's got different forms of cancer, a stroke, heart attack, even leprosy at one point. And always it seems to be this mystical, and he's going to be dead within 6 months. Now, that was 12 years ago, and he's still there. Look, we know he suffers from some health problems to do with his back and so forth, but his father and his grandfather both lived well into their 80s, and he's now cradled with the best medical care that Russian science and money can provide. So there's no real evidence for this. It's almost just simply an element of just simply, wanting desperately to feel that there will be some Deus ex machina answer. We really can't take it seriously.
Yeah, really fascinating. Mark Galeotti, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for joining us. Mark Galeotti, they're a historian and Russia expert, contributor, to The Times as well, which you can read with your digital subscription. Go to thetimes.com. Matthew says, if this Ukraine deal happens, what's to stop Trump handing it all to Putin? Good question, Matthew.
Thank you very much for being here. We had a very, very good cabinet meeting, and we're getting the bad ones out first, and we're taking them out. And there's some really bad ones.
Mr. President,
yeah, please.
About Ukraine, in an interview with Time magazine published this morning, President Zelensky said he believes that some members of your team have been influenced by Russian information. Those were his words. What do you have to say to that?
Well, probably they have been influenced to get this thing settled, because Ukraine wants to see it settled. I think they have to have it settled, and Russia wants to see it settled. And I think if I weren't president, this would never happen. Marco's doing a great job, and Steve Witkoff has been incredible. Michael Waltz. We have a great group of people working on it, and that takes a good part of their day, settling something that really, it affects us monetarily because we've given so much money, and we're getting that done. In fact, Scott is telling me that the agreement on rare earths is just about completed. They'll sign it shortly. So it's, as you know, Europe is in for a very small fraction of what we're in for. It affects them much more than it affects us. Again, they are in as a loan, which nobody knew until I came along. Europe is giving the money to Ukraine as a loan. We were just pouring money into Ukraine. It was a very unfair situation. So we made a deal on rare earths. But most importantly, we want to stop the killing that's going on. 2,500 on average, mostly soldiers, a week are being killed. And they're Russian and they're Ukrainian, and if we can stop it, that's a very important thing to me on a human basis. Okay, anybody else?
Are you signing the rare earths deal today? Is that what you mean?
No, we'll be signing it soon.
So Ukraine.
It'll be signed very soon.
China.
May I ask another question on Ukraine?
Yeah.
You recently mentioned the fate of all the Ukrainian children abducted and transported to Russia.
Right.
So are you demanding that Russia return these kids to their families in Ukraine?
Well, it's one of the things that we're talking about. I know that no decision's been made. We're talking about territory right now. We're talking about lines of demarcation. We're talking about power plant ownership. Some people are saying the United States should own the power plant and then work it that way because we have the expertise to fix it up, et cetera, et cetera. It's okay. That would something like that would be fine with me. But they are talking about ownership of the big nuclear power plant in particular. But all of these things will come up, and they have come up, and that has been discussed, yes. Seems they're all coming back. We have probably identified maybe $4 trillion worth of companies. I would like to ask maybe Marco to say a few words on what's happening with respect to, in particular, Russia, Ukraine, where we have some pretty good news, I think. We want to get it stopped. We're losing 2,500 young people, and these are Russian and Ukrainian people largely. And they're not American people, but on a human basis, we want to get it stopped, and we want to stop spending billions and billions of dollars to a country that we think it's time, and we're doing pretty well. Marco, do you want to say something?
Yeah, Mr. President, first of all, I think the American people should be proud that we have a president that's promoting peace and the end of conflict on this planet. This is a war that's gone on for 3 years, as you pointed out, that, as you rightly pointed out, would have never happened had you been president, but now it's here, and it needs to be brought to an end. There is no military solution to this war. It has to end through negotiation. And there's only one leader in the world that's capable of bringing the two sides to a table, and that's our president, the President of the United States, President Trump. And that's what he's done. And so today, even as we speak, we have teams on the ground in Saudi Arabia meeting with the respective sides in the hopes of making progress towards this outcome that we all want to see. And I think that the country owes you a great debt of gratitude, and the world really, because I mean, you're the only leader in the planet that can bring the two sides together to bring an end to this conflict, and that's what you've done. And you've done it despite you know, impediments from other countries and others who maybe have different opinions about how this should go. But ultimately, I think that the only chance we have for peace is through the president's leadership, and you've shown that, and we hope it'll bear fruit. And today will hopefully be one step more in that direction. Never happened had you been president, but now it's here, and it needs to be brought to an end. There is no military solution to this.
We have, and it's going to be really, really quite amazing. Okay, I want to thank everybody very much. This was a great meeting. These are phenomenal people. We're lucky to have them. I have to tell you, I want to thank you all. And Elon, I want to thank you. I know you've been through a lot with this. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
How many more press do you expect in the federal government?